Good morning. I'm Gretchen Rowan. I'm a partner at Wilmer Hale and in the investment management group. And my panelists and I are going to introduce ourselves and we'll dive right in. This is Tito.
Sure. Hi, good morning. I'm surprised to see so many people here.
I know.
Up and early, 8 o'clock, full house. My name is Tito Pomra. I am currently in multiple roles. I'm founder of my compliance consulting firm called Advisor Compliance Consulting, and I'm also a chief compliance officer for advisor in San Francisco area called Main Street Research. And I previously, prior to coming to what my current roles, I was in-house CCO for a firm in San Francisco called Matthews Asia, Matthews International Capital Management for the fund and the advisor. And prior to that, I was at Franklin Templeton for 16 years. So I was just talking to somebody last night. I became an IAA member. It used to be ICA back then, and I think in 1998. So I'm trying to start compliance a long time ago. So.
Hi, yeah, my name is William Nelson. I'm an Associate General Counsel here at the Investment Advisors Association. I'm a newbie, so this is my first conference. I started in November. Previously served as Chief Compliance Officer for Mercer Advisors, an SEC-registered firm, and I also spent time as a Public Policy Counsel for CFP Board, the Certified Financial Planner Board.
And I'm Megan Ermler. I'm currently Associate General Counsel at Raymond James, supporting the Asset Management Division. And prior to that, I was at Cleary Gottlieb working on IA issues.
Okay. So Code of Ethics, bread and butter. You all know it very well. Main requirements are you need a standard of business conduct that's going to apply to all supervised persons. You need provisions requiring access persons to report their personal securities transactions and that you review them. You need provisions requiring your supervised persons to report violations of the code, particularly to the chief compliance officer or someone who will escalate to them. And you need provisions requiring your supervised person to receive a copy of the code and sign an acknowledgement. So we've structured the presentation as practical challenges that we've all encountered, and hopefully it'll help you head off some of these fun ones in your life. So first one, definitions. Everything turns on the definitions, and so the fact that there are challenges with them can be a problem. First hypothetical, my CEO recently heard that some advisors treat digital assets as a reportable security. She wants to know, when would that be appropriate for an investment advisor? Is it difficult to operationalize? So how do CCOs weigh the operational challenges against the benefits?
Okay, so just raise your hand if, I just want to get, I did a survey. I also co-chair a really large roundtable in San Francisco Bay Area. We have like 160 members. And we did a roundtable and we asked, at the survey, we asked, how many people are making digital assets or reportable securities and requiring pre-clearance. There were about 70 people who answered, 80% do not. How many people here require digital assets as reportable securities and require pre-clearance? Okay, quite a few. Kudos to you guys. I don't know how you guys are doing that, but good luck. There's been a lot of cases lately, and I'll let Megan talk about some of the enforcement actions that the SEC has taken on what is reportable. It is a security, it's not a security, the Howey test, whatever. My view when I was in-house, and I'm still in-house CCO, if you are not making any investments in your client portfolios in digital assets, it's a risk-based approach to any compliance process, right? So then what is the risk if your employees, access people, are investing in digital assets? First of all, you can't front-run digital assets. I don't know how you're going to front-run digital assets, but somebody might figure that out in the future. So there's no direct conflict existing. Now, even if your client portfolios, you do make investments in digital assets, then also the conflict is very minimum, right? Now, obviously, there are ETFs, that digital assets ETFs, and they're private funds, and then require pre-clearance and disclosure and reportable securities. But, when you're talking about Bitcoins, Ethereum, we have taken the position in our firm that we are not going to require reportable and pre-clearance because it's very difficult to, first of all, get reportable actual statements on digital assets. Secondly, I would never refuse a pre-clearance on a digital asset. I don't know why I would do it, because the firm I work for, they don't invest in digital assets. So just taking the burden of compliance, because the other side is that if you say that you do all that, and if you don't do it, you have failure to comply. So that's my view on this topic.
So actually, we're going to jump to the next one because I know the lawyers in the room are going, ah! And next slide, you'll see the lawyer in the room says, SEC has taken the position that the only two that are not securities under the federal securities law are Ether and Bitcoin. Jury is out on all of the others as to whether or not they are security. So the CEO says, wait, so everything else could be a security? How could we not be reporting on them? And how do we explain to the CEO what is the difference between a currency, Bitcoin and Ether, what the SEC has said is not a security, versus a digital asset, which may be a security and therefore reportable?
Yeah, so explaining that to anyone is very difficult. So the SEC did put out guidance that the Howey test would be applying to digital assets. That is an old case to determine when you have an investment contract that has 4 factors: investment of money, common enterprise, expectation of profits, and derived from the efforts of others are the general 4 factors. And the environment is that, these digital assets are each being looked at and evaluated under that test to determine which ones are going to be considered securities. And some have fallen on the line of yes, and others no, and others are still being evaluated. So it is a hard task for someone trying to, look at the technical definition of reportable security and know that tomorrow the definition could include something that it doesn't include today, and how you approach your code and who you have report on reportable securities for pre-clearance when that is an ever-changing environment. So as Tito said, it's going to be a risk-based approach. And I think also going to turn, as Tito said, on what your firm does. If your firm doesn't have clients allowed to hold, well, they can't hold them in the account, but, to engage in transactions in digital assets, there's probably less risk. But if your advisors are recommending digital assets to clients, I think you have to really look at potential conflicts, although they might be less than traditional securities. There could still be conflicts in what the FAs are doing for, financial advisors are doing for themselves and their own personal accounts, and what they're recommending to clients.
And so punchline here, and we'll have Tito again refresh the results of the survey, but SEC is on the record as saying that some are not securities, Ether and Bitcoin, and then we have enforcement actions coming out saying that certain ones are securities. Yeah. And if they are securities, then technically they are in the definition of reportable security. And so we're stuck with this practical impasse because, as Tito pointed out, there is no account statement for one of these things. So how on earth are you going to collect them and review them? And so do you want to, again, walk us through what were the results of that survey?
Sure, but I do want to make 2 points here. One point is that if you are a manager managing only on digital assets, right, and there are firms there, especially in the Bay Area where I am, that are private funds that are only investing in digital assets, maybe you have to take a different, viewpoint on, pre-clearing digital assets for employees and access people, right? And the second point I actually wanted to make is it's really, really important to understand one of the biggest issue in investing in digital assets for your access people and for your, your clients is the KYC AML issues. There's a significant amount of them in this area, and you don't want to make headlines. I mean, I don't know if somebody saw the headlines yesterday. The Justice Department is looking for this one guy. He basically did a $2.5 billion digital coin fraud, and he's basically taken off. I think he's hiding somewhere in India or something, right? But he was able to Ponzi scheme $2.5 billion from people on this area, so it was crazy.
Okay.
Yeah, and while Tito's getting that up, I can also speak to just some of the logistical issues that, from 2011, there's actually been over 7,000 digital securities or digital assets.
Wow.
Now, there's only about 1,000 left, so it kind of tells you, some come up for a couple days, for a couple months. Whoever thought, a coin named after a dog could become popular, but Elon Musk said it should. So you just, I think the logistical issues there are, if you are trying to collect this, like, how do you do that? Because there are so many, and there are so many different issues, not only legal, but also operationally.
And so if helpful to have strength in numbers, you've got the lawyers telling you what it says, and then you've got Tito giving you some, again, the statistics, what was it?
Right, yeah, exactly. So security-backed digital crypto assets and policy, 60% of the people who basically did the survey in our survey don't address digital assets in their policy at all, in any form, way, or anything. So, you want to comment on that?
Yeah. So stay tuned. I've got a bunch of other ones. Should we jump on?
Stable coins, are they allowed to be traded on your access person? Again, 80% of the people, 75% of the people said that they don't have not addressed stable coins in their policy. NFTs, anybody investing in NFTs, non-fungible tokens? Did anybody know it was NFTs? I'm trying to still figure that out myself. So 90% of the people in the survey say that they are not requiring access person to pre-clear NFTs or even addressing it in the policy. So this is all new area. I mean, other crypto, it was like, are you allowing people to invest in SEC-defined digital assets as issued or transferred using distributed ledger or blockchain technology, including assets as digital coins or digital tokens? I guess, again, 80% of the people are not addressing this in their policy. So it's really a new area, and I think when the rules and regulations really come in, and I think they will, I think this is where that you basically go back to the drawing board and address digital assets as, not just a reportable security, but, what you need to do with regards to your compliance program.
Right. And for the lawyers or the people who are focused on the Howey test, there was a case that came out in February, Valentine's Day, where they applied both Reeves and Howey, implying that if it passes either of those tests, it is a security. So the definition has gotten even more painful. You can't have someone in-house applying Howey and Reeves to every single digital asset. So next challenge, definition of supervised person. Many of us are at large financial institutions where the entity that is registered, legal entity, as an investment advisor has no actual, like W-2 or statutory 1099 employees. Instead, the activities performed by those employees of the advisor are performed primarily by seconded employees and by different departments, groups, and teams within separate legal entities that are affiliated, but not technically the advisor. So for purposes of the code, obviously anyone who's doing investment advice is a supervised person. But what about those people who don't have a title, who don't have a similar function, who are not providing investment advice? Think about admin or tech. Are they supervised persons? When do their activities rise to the level that you would have to put them under the code? So from a lawyer's perspective, we look to like the Thompson no action letter. And then practical rules of thumb. We looked at what percentage of their time is being allocated to the registered investment advisor. And there are problems with all of these, which Megan I'll touch upon in a minute, but if you are trying to benchmark yourself, percentage of time, some firms say if you spend 25% of your time, if you spend 30% of your time, if someone in IT spends 40% of their time, these are all different standards that different firms try to apply, which is almost impossible because it is a rolling period. Their responsibilities could be fluid. How do you do that? Megan was, I'm sorry. William, you were going to tell us about your own experience.
Yeah, and I can talk a little bit about this. So at my previous firm, all our employees, were W-2 employees, so it wasn't as big of an issue. But we did have issues with temp employees, contract employees, what they have access to, how many hours they're working a week, even our legal interns, externs. And another issue that comes up, and it depends on your firm, is that, acquisitions. So my firm did a lot of acquisitions, and, maybe they were not a supervised person at the acquired firm, but you want them to be a supervised person at your firm. So you are going to have to deal with some of those issues. And I think the important thing to note here is having those policies and procedures that define when it is a supervised person, having either, whether it is a percentage of time, whether you are just all or nothing, all our employees are supervised persons, or you're actually defining those. So I think that, how you make that determination is going to be really important.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with that, and just on the, Thompson and how we evaluate it, it's all very facts and circumstances when it's not clearly within the definition, looking at what that person does for the RIA. I think that depending on what they do, what their activities are, the percentage of time can be, not as helpful a factor. If it is a substantive thing, role that you would think that person needed to be supervised under the control of the advisor for the activities that they're doing. Under Thompson, the idea was that if you brought someone in as a supervised person, they didn't have to go out and register themselves. So if the activities they're doing would cause them to have to be an IAR or a registered advisor themselves, then you would want them to be under your supervision and control for those activities. And I think this comes up also in the access person definition, which I know we're going to get to next, but really looking at not so much do you fall within the definition of supervised person or access person, but is what you're doing or the information you have access to put you in the same conflicted position or potentially a position where you could use information inappropriately, then you need to have policies and procedures around that, whether or not you're in the definition.
Yeah, I take a view again on risk-based and, good faith efforts here. From my perspective, if you're a smaller firm where, you have 10 people, 15 people, 20 people, everybody has access to everything, systems, we probably won't take the approach that everybody's supervised and access. Now, you have a large firm, then you go through this analysis of who is a supervised person and who is an access person. Look, when I was at Franklin Templeton, back in 2000, they had 8,000 employees and they had 6,000 access persons. So you can imagine a nightmare of running a code for 6,000 access people. So we went back to the drawing board again and said, well, everybody needs to be an access person. And we came back and said, okay, maybe 4,000 people need to be access person. The 2,000 people in other countries who have no access to any system, they are not really access people. So, but really, it totally depends on your firm. This is again, one size doesn't fit all. So.
Okay, next fun challenge. We've talked about reportable securities. We've talked about supervised persons. Let's go to access persons. So access persons are the ones who have to be actually reporting on the securities. And recently, we began engaging an outside consultant to provide buy, sell, and hold recommendations for consideration by the CIO. The consultant's contract expressly prohibits her from providing investment advice on behalf of the advisor. So on its face, the contract seems to get us out of the definition of supervised person. She is prohibited from providing advice and therefore is not someone providing advice underneath the control of the advisor. So if access person is defined as a subset of supervised persons and she is not a supervised person, can we rest assured that she is not an access person? And for a mutual fund family, you're not going to have this problem because 17J1 ties your status to access to information, but the Advisors Act doesn't. So what do we do? And Megan was going to tell us about this one.
Yeah, I mean, and as I just touched on, in a situation like that, you can potentially push yourself out of the definition of access person because you're not a supervised person. Maybe you don't need to collect holdings reports, transaction reports, and follow the specifics of the rule as to access persons, but the overall fiduciary duty would be to prevent, to prevent insider trading, to prevent inappropriate use of any of the information that person had. So I think that it may get you out of the technical requirements, which can sometimes be hard, when you have a consultant or, a lot of private equity fund boards have people on those boards that are not in the business of being an advisor, but they have access to information as in their role on that board they're not going to give their, holdings reports to the CCO of the private equity fund. So in those situations, I think you have to just have confidentiality provisions, non-disclosures, and other ways to protect the information that they get, even if you're not going to have to, be within the technical requirements of what an access person would have to do under the rule.
Right. So the way Megan mentioned this to me that I thought was beautiful to explain it was there's technical compliance with the reporting person stuff, and then there's the code of ethics, which is the general, is something that consultant doing that could implicate what's going on under the code. Could they be a board member of somewhere else? Could they be trading on their own behalf based on what the CIO is doing? And so really two different prongs. Reporting is one thing, but then also everything else under the code. And we can always look back to the Federated case back in 2016 where the SEC said this consultant, probably a supervised person because of the way you defined it in your code, maybe not otherwise, but certainly required. And so the fact that he wasn't reporting and he wasn't telling them about his board activities and conflicts was a violation. Okay, so.
I just want to make a point on, Megan raised a really interesting point on access person on insider trading. If you guys are not familiar with the Ares management case in LA about access and board membership on a private equity, please read that case. It was a, really failure to have policy and procedures to prevent data because an access person was on the board of a public company. They paid $1 million fine for not having policy and procedures to address this. So.
Okay, so once we tackle the definitions, then we get to the fun of actually applying the provisions. So practical challenges with the initial holdings report. Remember, you have to do initial, and then you also have to do statements and transaction reports, right? So the 10-day clock on collecting that initial holdings report starts when the individual gains the access person status. So in the cross-staffing situation we discussed, allocation of an individual's time and responsibility is often fluid. But let's say my team is finding it difficult to spot when the individual status changes. How do other advisors address that? And are there any tricks? And first, Tito, why does this matter?
Well, I was making a comment earlier in our test, the speaker's presentation room that for investment advisors and for a compliance professional, the code of ethics is probably the most important critical policy. You want to train all your employees, not just your access people and supervised people, on the code, right? Because it goes to your reputational risk. It's important. This is a culture of compliance tone at the top you want to set up. I'm so. I guess frustrated sometimes because I go into firms where the access people who are the most senior people in the firm have neglected to comply with this very simple task of initial reporting and quarterly reporting and pre-clearing and all that stuff. Obviously, automation system, a lot of automated system. I think a lot of vendors out there are providing really great tools to manage this very seamlessly, efficiently, and effectively. But it's just this is really critical. Couple of my clients in the SEC exam got written up in this exact issue. It is an area that is very, very focused by the regulators. Really, it goes to the ethics. I remember when I used to report to the fund board, one of the things they used to tell us is that they wanted all portfolio manager, doesn't matter how material or immaterial, code of ethics violation reported to them. And I asked them why. He said, well, look, these are the guys who are managing fund shareholders' money. If they don't follow a simple process of complying with code of ethics, we don't want them to manage the money.
And one thing I want to make sure that the violation that was alleged was, in Tito's case, it was just a repeated failure to spot access persons and gather that statement in a timely fashion. So the SEC is looking, it has to be a timestamp essentially, and if the SEC knows that they had access person status that occurred earlier than that, it's so easy to catch you on a violation, and if they see multiple ones of those happening, you get written up for it. So,
William wants to say something.
And William was going to tell us some practical tricks.
So for some practical tricks, I think the first thing is always work closely with your HR department. I think that, when it comes to titles, when it comes to, percentage of work, when it comes to access to materials, I think that working closely with your HR so you have those definitions is really important. I also think use of technology, maybe in your CRM, when someone has a specific position title, it gets flagged and says, hey, we should look at this. Are they an access person now? What information do they have? What job duties do they have? So I think that both, working closely with HR, but also use of technology, I think is really the kind of the two-pronged attack.
Well, the other thing I would mention is that you want to go to the supervisor of the access person to get validation that they are an access person. Compliance professionals, should not be supervising, right? It should be the burden on the managers and the supervisors. So you could probably go there too, so.
No.
And I realize that we are now almost halfway there, and I was supposed to give you the first code word,
Yeah.
Plato, like Aristotle and Plato. It's just Plato. Next slide. You've got the initial holdings report. Now you've got the practical challenge of reviewing those reports that start coming in quarterly. The hypothetical is my firm collects holding and transaction reports from all supervised persons, not just access persons. So great, that means that you probably got that initial access statement, it's timely, but that 2020 risk alert identified as a failure that firms were not reviewing the transaction and holdings reports. So if prophylactic reporting is collected, what is the expectation to review them? Is a lesser standard of review acceptable if you're collecting them from people who are supervised but not access? And I think William was going to speak to this one.
Yeah, absolutely. I think the simple answer is no. I think that, if you have it in your policies and procedures, you should be doing it. And the SEC is going to hold you to that. So the SEC isn't going to come and look, oh, well, they're not required to do so, so that's okay. If you have it in your policies and procedures, the SEC is really going to look at that and require you to do that. So, I think the other question is, what's the efficacy of that? Like, they're going to kind of ask, hey, why are you collecting these reports if you're not going to review them? So it's just kind of, they might look at it as, oh, you're just kind of trying to check the box, but you're not really, under what they say, the spirit of the rule or, the actual written law. So I think that's, really important that, just don't, I guess, all in all, just don't do it to do it. There should be a reason behind it, and it should also be meaningful.
And Megan was going to tell us some tricks, how your firm does it.
Well, I mean, I don't know if it's a trick, but when you have a large firm, I think bringing the accounts, if you're a broker-dealer advisor, bringing those accounts in-house and trying to minimize the number of outside investment accounts is something that I think a lot of big firms do. Because the review can be much more automated, and you're not collecting, under the rule even, you're not collecting individual transaction reports from everybody if the account is held at the firm. So that's a way that you can do the review efficiently, and then the manual process just comes for the exceptions, which are the outside investment accounts that any person that you require as a supervised person or an access person, that will still be a manual review, but hopefully less so.
Right. And what Megan pointed out was that having the same brokerage statement be the same form of makes it a million times easier, rather than having to look at the different format of this statement versus this statement versus this statement to gather the required information. So, next, on to pre-clearance request. Under the Code of Ethics, you're required to pre-clear initial public offerings or limited offerings by your access persons, if they want to purchase in either of those. A lot of firms do more than that. And in our scenario here, the compliance team, which usually handles pre-clearance requests, is short-staffed, so hopefully this is an occasional occurrence. But nonetheless, a star portfolio manager calls and says, hey, I really want to place a trade by the end of the day, and I'm not getting a response. Any reason for the review? So what are the key points that you want to communicate? And are there additional steps that you wish you would have taken and you've been burned because you didn't take them in this type of scenario? Tito, we're going to have.
So I actually want to go back to the initial holding. One thing you need to remind all your employees is a lot of people don't realize what they need to report. They think they only have to report their accounts. They have to remind them to report their spouse's account or any accounts they have discretion, beneficial ownership on. So to remind that. Going back to pre-clearance, I tell, and they don't like this answer, I tell, access people who are trying to, obviously make some personal wealth by investing in, securities that require pre-clearance, that, being part of an advisor, personal trading is actually not a privilege. I mean, it's a privilege, not a right. So you cannot, there's no way you'll get approval the same day for your personal trading for so many different reasons. Reasons could be restricted list, the firm trading the same security, or, compliance is busy doing other things, that are more critical. And, we're not really sitting around basically being your day trader, pre-approved day trading. I don't know, you guys, or people are sending you AMC and GameStop orders and you're pre-clearing those, right? So that's one thing you need to basically set the tone about, personal trading, and that's why we encourage a lot of times, for personal trading purposes to have managed accounts, because you can avoid all of this, because you have no discretion on managed accounts, and, they're reportable, but they don't require pre-clearance. So that's my view on that, and I'm not sure what other think about that, so.
So, William, you had a great point, which I'm forgetting at the moment. Sorry.
Yeah, so I think it's, it's always technology-based as well. I think that can help, but I think it's applied consistently. So, if you do have certain staff that is, requesting more, even if they are your star advisor, your star employee, I think that you really need to have that consistency across the board. I think that's really important.
And the other thing he had mentioned before was that annual trainings, you can set the expectation.
Right.
You can let them know that 24, 48 hours should be a good time. Don't expect more than that, so that you don't encounter this situation.
Yeah, and I think, Gretchen, to Tito's point, I think that, the education is so important, what you have to report, when you have to report it. Some, don't look at the annual kind of review and the annual, talk to your staff as kind of a check the box. Really talk to them, make sure they know and understand. I kind of see it as compliance speak, and there's business speak, and there's legal speak, and there's just, almost these different kinds of languages that need to be meshed together. So I think it's always really important, because they might not know that they have to report their, spouse's account, or what if their mother-in-law lives with them, and that, that counts as a household account. So I think there's, there could be a lot of nuances there.
Yeah, and, training, I'll tell you something, if you don't take anything from this conference, take one word: training, 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 training. I'll tell you, these are all, live from other people's mistakes. Examples, I have a client, they got so many deficiencies in the code of ethics, like 4 pages long, that we had to basically go in there and do an exclusive code of ethics training. Not your annual training, not your new employee training, just focused on why it's important to do the quarterly disclosures, why it's important to do the annual initial attestation disclosure, why it's important to pre-clear, all of that. Inside, obviously Code of Ethics goes outside business activities were never disclosed and approved, private placements were never disclosed and approved, so many areas that it falls into. And, and a lot of firms, people, ignore it, totally.
Yeah, and to that point, I think that a lot of the questions I would always receive is, I didn't know I had to do it. It wasn't like, oh, I'm going to go do this bad thing, I'm going to go out and, as Tito said, do those GameStop trades and those meme stocks. But, it's that, giving them that knowledge empowers them, and always having that open door to come and talk to you if they do have any questions.
Okay, next slide. Practical challenges with restricting short-term trading.
Too fast, sorry.
No, I'm sorry. So a lot of firms go beyond what is required, and they do restrict short-term trading either in the same security or the number of transactions within a given period. And we've got a scenario here where the chief operating officer says, whoa, it's really getting excessive. You've got so many more reports than we've ever had before. What is going on? And should we impose short-term trading restrictions, meaning in a single security, or total transaction restrictions? And would that help? What's the benefit?
Yeah, so we have heard about firms doing this. This is on personal trading, obviously, that, should a firm have a policy where the advisors, the IARs, are limited in what they can do for their own accounts because of the increase in access to the markets that everybody has, and then these requests that come through for pre-clearance. So we do know, I've heard of some firms doing this. My firm doesn't, but people are definitely looking at frequency of trades by employees, the different conflicts that it might raise, especially if you're trading heavily in something that you're not recommending to any of your clients, like we were talking about earlier with crypto. There's potentially employees doing crypto where the firm doesn't do it, or any of these, more high-risk securities. And also, beyond conflicts, just time and attention. Do you want your employees spending a significant amount of time on their own accounts in these short-term trading scenarios? So it's something that compliance, we think are definitely looking at, compliance officers. I think William had something, yeah.
Tell us more.
Yeah, and there's, I think there's a few different issues here. So there's trading in the same security, but also frequent trading of all securities. And there's just kind of two different red flags. So I think the first is that, trading in the same security, there could be front-running issues, market manipulation, but at the same time, just frequent trading, maybe review those timestamps, for diversion of the employee's activities. So say, for instance, your marketing materials, say you're a very long-term investor, financial planning firm, but you have advisors day trading and frequently trading. It just, the culture might not mesh. So, I think that's really important, both from, an advisor perspective, but also from a legal perspective as well.
And one thing William pointed out, timestamps, if they're doing this during work.
Yeah, during work hours, yeah.
But they have to.
Thank you. Maybe those timestamps are less necessary. If it's not lunchtime. Those restrictions on short-term trading, those were described in the adopting release back in 2004. And a decade before that, so back to 1994, there was a blue ribbon panel that was largely mutual fund executives, et cetera. And this was kind of the deeper dive where they thought through, well, why don't we just prohibit all investment personnel from trading flat out? And the panel decided, that really isn't necessary. There are other ways to do it, and it could be a disservice to clients. And so, disservice in the sense of it could make them at a competitive disadvantage. Banks and insurance companies and other financial firms are going to be able to draw in investment professionals who want to be able to trade for their own account, whereas investment advisors wouldn't if we did a flat prohibition. So if you are in a mutual fund family and you do have a short-term trading, and often it's coupled with a disgorgement. If there's a short-term trade with a profit, you have to disgorge it. Let's say that your firm is implementing that and the best practices of restrictions on tradings from what was mentioned in the adopting release, but not technically required back in 2004. They were just acquired by a private equity firm. They're no longer going to be advising mutual funds. And the CEO asks a couple good questions. So how does limiting the number or frequency of trades by the employee of an advisor actually benefit or protect clients? And I think we may have already touched on the answer to this one. And then the other one is, would imposing those limits actually place the registered advisor at a competitive disadvantage to other firms? Do you think portfolio managers are deciding where they want to work in part based on that, which was the blue ribbon panel's, again, justification for why we wanted to, one of the justifications for why we wanted to still permit this. So, Tito.
So, there's obviously, the 17J1204 differences, blue ribbon more focused on mutual funds. Most of the mutual fund access people have a 60-day, holding period after they buy something. They can't sell unless there's obviously hardship waivers, right? One of the things that I did at my previous firm, and I've done that at my current firm, and I recommend clients to do, is to eliminate some burden on compliance professional and giving some flexibility to your access people. You can actually do an analysis on, doing some de minimis sort of exceptions in your code for personal trading. So for example, very large firm I used to work for, they had so many access people doing crazy going with personal trading reviews, right? So they decided to come up with a de minimis at that time that we will not require pre-clearance for any securities bought by access person in S&P 500 or NASDAQ 1000. And the reason for that is that they felt that, it is impossible to front-run large cap, blue chip securities, and the issue is front-running for, and the conflicts, right? And obviously the other issue was what you're managing. If you are a portfolio manager for a small cap fund and you're investing in large cap security in your personal trading, there's no conflict, right? So that's one approach. Other de minimis that I have actually recommended is, based on number of shares or dollar amounts on a given day on a given security. So the previous firm I used to work at, the most recent one, we put in a de minimis saying that you do not need pre-clearance, doesn't matter what security it is, for 500 shares or $10,000, whichever it is, on one security on a given day. So access person, I can buy 10 different securities in that de minimis and don't require pre-clearance. It's reportable, but don't require pre-clearance. So things like that, where you have eliminated the conflict. And I don't think so SEC has ever said this is wrong or good. So remember, compliance is all about a process, and you set up a process, you manage your compliance risk, and once the compliance risks are managed very well, the conflicts are mitigated, then the process is followed. That's good enough, So you can, do it that way. Any other suggestions?
William,
Yeah, so I think it's all going to be risk-based. I think Tito's completely right. I think that, the limits versus prohibitions, I think firms a lot of times, when they have these prohibitions, are they being enforced? Is it truly a prohibition? Are there hardship waivers? We saw that recently, in some of these cases with the communications, they were prohibiting communications on certain mediums, but then not really enforcing that or reviewing those. So I think anytime when you have those complete prohibitions, you really need to be careful about whether you're actually, monitoring and enforcing those. So I think it's, like Tito said, it's all about a risk-based approach.
Okay, so next one, practical challenges with documenting code violations. And this one is often missed, but Rule 204-2A12 requires advisors to maintain a record of any violation of the code and any action taken as a result. So you've got to have a books and records, essentially, of every violation of the code, which includes any violation of the federal securities laws, because your code must require people to comply with the federal securities law. So violation of any federal securities law would be a violation of the code. It similarly must be documented. It is a required book and record. And I have heard that OC routinely focuses on this required record. So what are the common pitfalls to avoid when you are developing a written record of a violation, and what are the questions you should expect from OC when they look at that books and record?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think, the first thing right off the bat is a lack of written policies and procedures on how you handle those violations and how you handle that documentation. I definitely think that's number one. The second is providing an inadequate record. If the SEC comes in and says, show me your code violations over the exam period, and, what was the date? What was the time? Were clients involved? Who were the employees? What were the securities? So, I think it's having that, adequate record to really show that, hey, we've documented this, we've showed the violation, and we've gone through that process. I think also some firms tend to limit the scope. It's any violation. So, if firms are saying, oh, it wasn't a material violation, that doesn't matter. So I think that's a really important point. Any violation, there needs to be documentation. Also, I think, more recently in the private funds proposal, now that RAs, could possibly be required to document their annual reviews, I think this is going to be even more important. So part of that process. So, as far as SEC questions, again, they'll just request those records of any violations during the exam period. I think they're going to look at consistent handling. Do you handle executive violations the same as you do as staff employees? Questions about how you enforce your code, the testing, the monitoring, and also for repeated violations. If they see, as Tito mentioned, if you see, these repeated violations over and over from access persons and not submitting their holding reports, they're going to really question that and say, do you have those proper processes, policies in place?
So next one, whistleblower protections. One of the requirements in the code is that you need your supervised persons to promptly report any violation of the federal securities law to the CCO or a designee. At the same time, we've got these whistleblower rules that prohibit an advisor from, quote unquote, impeding an individual from communicating with the SEC regarding a possible violation of the securities laws. So would a code of ethics violate the whistleblower rules if it required employees to report the violation to the CCO under the code before reporting to the SEC? And when might employees actually be impeded by a requirement to report consistent with the code? Megan has given that some thought.
So, as you all probably know, the code does require that you have, the code doesn't have, the rule on code of ethics does not have that many requirements. One of the requirements is that you have a policy that any violations of the code are reported to the CCO or designee. And there's also a reference, actually, that predates all these whistleblower rules to having whistleblower protection in that reporting. But the protection is that if an employee reports a code violation to the CCO in good faith, that you won't have any, retribution against you as an employee. So it doesn't address the larger whistleblower rule issue that has come out where we're not allowed to have any policy or procedure where an employee would feel like they couldn't go to a regulator. I think that if you simply have a requirement that code violations are reported to the CCO and don't specifically say, and you must come to the CCO first and not the SEC, you'll probably steer clear of that because it is a requirement within the code rule that you have that provision. And then you would hope that the employee, depending on the violation, obviously, if it's very clear, they are well within their rights to go to the regulator, but the idea of going to the CCO first is that it can be investigated and thoroughly looked into to see what the issue is before bringing in the regulator. So I think the important part there is just not to have any statement within your code that would actually prohibit someone from going or seek to prohibit someone from going to the regulator first, and just hope that the normal flow is that it goes to the compliance professionals and then the CCO and up the chain and then investigated before the regulators involved.
And so, God forbid we take the scenario a step further and the CCO is the one that is the subject of the self-reporting, meaning that not self-reporting, the violation. I've seen people go
To general counsel.
Yeah, or CIO, I think in that case.
Or the
Or
founder.
even the
CEO.
board and
Yeah.
the proper procedure.
And alternatively, you can adopt an anonymous hotline or an anonymous box that will get escalated to the CCO. You can require people to to report internally through that anonymous mechanism. It still satisfies the code, and it could never be said to have impeded someone from going to the SEC first.
And by the way, a lot of people I have seen who have actually not included this provision in their code, and SEC has basically pointed that out as a deficiency, so please make sure it is.
Yeah, and as just another practical point, I'd also note that, be careful about how your separation and release agreements are written. If there could be anything that could be construed about how, that former employee shouldn't go to some regulator, whether it's SEC or otherwise, then that could also be a
A
violation as well.
retaliation clause, and in there's state laws, not just federal laws, so,
Right. Okay.
in the fun part.
Yeah, we actually made it to our last slide, but then we've got plenty of other bonus material that we can cover if you don't have questions. So practical challenges with monitoring and enforcing the standard of conduct. You need to have a standard of conduct. And for the CCOs, we thought, what keeps others up at night with respect to implementing your code standard of conduct? And the ones that came to mind were discussing securities over social media and hyping the securities to profit. Using charitable donations to influence charities to become clients. A lot of them have big endowments, and so it is a good client. Gifts and entertainment issues related to unions and government employees. Special treatment from brokers, meaning even soft dollar research for personal trades that have nothing to do with your investment strategy, but it is something that the portfolio manager is personally interested in investing in. Calibrating penalties, getting it right, and sanctions for violating the code. Is it a no tolerance? Is it something less? And then higher fiduciary standard for advisors than politicians and salesmen, than even certain regulators, Treasury.
We know definitely politicians.
Yeah, so
Low bar to set, yeah.
Tita was going to speak to this.
Staying that in Washington, D.C., I'm not sure if that's the right place. Okay, so look, I've been doing this for such a long time, and I sit in front of portfolio managers, portfolio managers, and when I tell them, I'm going to just go different points here, that you can't use research that you're getting from broker-dealers for your personal trading. And they're like, what? Why not? I'm like, because you're stealing from your clients, because you got that research because their clients paid the commissions on it. And they're like, really? I say, yeah, really. So I say, if you use the Bloomberg terminal that you are soft dollaring, right, you cannot use that Bloomberg terminal to do your personal trading research. And they're like, oh, okay. So just making a point. There is so many areas of code of conduct, code of ethics that you can cover. I mean, obviously, we have focused on personal trading and, most of the aspects. I think there's another session tomorrow morning focused on insider trading. I'm not going to go there, which is a very, very hot topic, very big topic, always in the focus of the regulators, and very dear to my heart. I love talking about insider trading because there's so many cases there. So many people do some stupid things. But think about everything that happens in your firm that relates to your clients, right? What is the fiduciary, right? What are you doing? What is the best, interest of your clients in good faith, and nothing but the best interest of your clients? Let it be funds or individual clients, high net worth, private funds, whatever it is, right? So conflict risk management, right? So how many people do conflict inventories here? Conflicts where they exist in your day-to-day business, conflicts related to who your investors are, conflicts related to what investments you're making, conflicts related to outside business activity your employees have disclosed to you. One of the things I really strongly encourage everybody to do is a lot of employees fail to report outside business activity, and not just their outside business activity. They need to report their outside business activity to their spouses or some significant other or family member that can impact you. How many people are familiar with this huge outside business activity case that was basically a game changer, the BlackRock case where the CCO, talking about CCO liability in some cases, was actually, enforcement action was brought against the CCO of that case. It was a disclosure, a really simple disclosure that was not made on a significant investment by a portfolio manager's family in a private company that became the largest holding of the fund that he was managing. Simple that. Never disclosed to the fund board, never. SEC went after, I think they did really injustice there. They went after the CCO, Bart, really, he was barred from the industry, fined, all that stuff because of failure. Just giving you an example, I'm not trying to scare everybody here, so it is really, really critical. Now, the other code of conduct is that you need to train your employees to understand that the reputation of their social media doing and acting in public is the reputation of their firm. It's going to follow them. How many people are familiar with my old firm's a case on, not a case, but a firing, termination of a person? She went to, Central Park with her dog. She took a video. The gentleman was watching birds. He said, you can't have your dog here. They'll have a fight. She called the police on him. It was all recorded. She was fired the same day by Franklin Templeton. That is the kind of code of conduct you're talking about, reputation. I can talk about so many cases, so many incidents where people have acted so unprofessionally from the standard of code in so many different areas that have resulted in reputation risk to the firm. And that's why a lot of firms take these very egregious actions because of that. So again, going back to that magic word, training. It comes down to training, and you can do so many different ways of training. One of the things that I find very effective in training is to bring outside experts, not yourself as CCO, because everybody is sick of hearing from you as CCO. You bring in somebody like Gretchen,
And we
somebody
do it
like
for
William.
free.
Exactly. Some outside expert on the high-risk area of your firm. If you feel that code of ethics is a high-risk area, bring an expert. I brought in John Walsh, and I don't know how many people know John Walsh 1 year to do training for when I was a CCO for internally. One year I brought in a gentleman by the name of Reed Brodsky because insider trading was a high-risk area for the firm I was working for. These are the guys who came in there, and afterwards the portfolio managers and the senior management came up to after they got this training like, oh my God, this resonates to us. How important the code of ethics is, how important this is. So that's the message from this slide is. So there's so many areas. Please cover everything.
Yeah, and I think to, I think to Tito's point, I think that, everything we've talked about today is wonderful. But again, the code of ethics is a piece of paper. It's a bunch of words on a page. I think the important thing is that tone from the top. If your employees see the CCO setting an example, if they see your executives, that's why it's so important for you to talk to your executives, set that example for the staff, and I think they really will follow that. But also, have an open door. One of the things I tried to instill with my staff was that, I'm not the boogeyman. Compliance, yeah, you hear all about compliance. We request a lot of things, like Tito said, no one wants to hear from us. But, it's always an open door policy. Come talk to me. And I think, the cultural shift I wanted to see is whether, I could get a staff member to say, can I do this? I would rather have them say, should I do this? And if before I do this, should I talk to my CCO? So I think that tone from the top,
Yeah.
I think is really critically important.
And before we ask Megan what keeps her up at night, our end of session word is apple, like an orange or an apple, Okay, what keeps you up?
Well, just to the points that Tito and William have made, I think that those all become even more so when you have a really big firm, right? Because it's not necessarily about walking in the door of the CCO. You have all of your designees out there who are, managing things at branches, around the country. And so the compliance effort is really multi-layered, and you have to have the policies and procedures in place so that there's a process for everything, and then train so that people follow the process. And that's the only way to handle it when you're dealing with thousands of people. And it's not one person, not that it's ever one person's job for compliance, but there's not sort of that one goalie of the CCO.
Should be everybody's.
Yeah.
I think one thing there's so many rules coming out this year, so many updates. Cybersecurity been the one huge training issue, right? Talking about standard of conduct, right? We have 2 minutes. I don't know if anybody has any questions at all. We'll be here afterwards, and please come to us. I know this is a tough topic to ask question in a bigger audience, but I guess you have.
Yeah.
Yeah, de minimis. I was talking about de minimis. You can actually put in your policy where you can let your employees, trade certain number of shares in a given day without pre-clearing. That is correct, yeah. Even if the client trades, yeah, that is correct. But it has to be, it cannot be like 50,000 shares. It has to be a small number, right? So. That is correct, yeah, so, yeah.
And also different world for mutual funds than for
Exactly.
registered investment advisors, of course.
Because you're starting to take the conflict, right? And what is the conflict, right? Now, some firms will actually make it very clear and they have it in their policy that we will not trade, personal trade, will not approve any personal trade, doesn't matter what amount, the day we are trading for our clients, but we'll approve it for the next day.
And also, you can lean on back end. Pre-clearance isn't required except for IPOs
No.
and limited. So
Right.
if you have a heavy enough hammer, if they goof it up on the back end and you're rigorous enough, then maybe pre-clearance isn't as necessary. Just a question of cleanup versus preemptive. 13 seconds left. I know.
I think this is up. We're
Okay.
up. We are up.
And